We're back with part two on rowing in the same direction using communications to drive team alignment. Let's jump back in. Randall, I love that you talked about the person who had the same role, external comms, internal comms. That exactly is my next question. Um, so it's very easy once something is done to think, how can I repurpose this rather than, go back and try to do something else for the new purpose. So for those communications for internally, externally, like when the person shares that role, has to wear both hats, what filters have to be applied for that mind switching? Like, is there a different communication strategies or is it more or less the same? And maybe a good question is if you wouldn't say it to one audience, why would you say it to the other?
So man, we could talk about this for the day as well. That was an excellent question, and here's why. The best communications professionals understand that different audiences have different needs. So let's define those audiences. If we're able to define those audiences and what their needs are, then we could think about what are the communications and marketing and all the other initiatives that we might actually have to affect that audience to think, do, act, um, share, whatever it happens to be, the message that you actually have. And if you look at those different audiences, they all have slightly different needs. So when we cross that divide from internal to external, um, it's the same thing. Who are the external audiences? Now, we've got a particular cool tool, Strata, strategic target analysis, that makes it a little bit easier to do this kind of thing. But when you're responsible for marketing and communications, you're internal and external, you've got some interesting opportunities. One of those opportunities is this. Very often, you're as for external marketing, you're working with a marketing consultancy or an agency or some branding people, whatever it is that might be working on your campaigns, if you will. What you can do is you could repurpose some of that work to because it might be very relevant to those internal audiences that you've defined. If there's these things that are happening outside, there's less of a gap, okay, between how you amplify what's happening outside, inside. Here's a simple example. If, for example, there's a campaign that your organization is doing that involves, say, social media, like just about everything these days, there's a social media aspect of it. Well, here on the inside, you've got all of these staff members and perhaps volunteers. What can you do to help those people amplify what you're getting done outside? Like it seems pretty basic when you think about it. But when the internal and the external roles are held by different people, sometimes a gap forms, right? And that's a bit of a challenge, right? Same thing with respect to internal communications driving what's happening outside. I said it earlier before. You can't be strong on the outside unless you're strong on the inside. So how do we make people strong on the inside? Yeah, that's right. Okay, it's training, it's retreats, it's good management, it's great communications, right? Which is what we're talking about today. But what can we do to help the external brand, if you will, by having internal amplification? So, for example, if you're recruiting, the simplest example is, well, gee, who do you know that might be a good fit for working here? We've got an X open positions that we're looking to recruit for. The recruitment brand, right? So that's one example. Okay. If you're an organization that's volunteer driven or a membership organization, oh my God, that's a third dimension because the members they're not external, but they're not internal to the team, right? They're your members. That's why you're there, right? And those are who you serve. So what are the distinct audiences in there? And if it's one person that's responsible for all, then there's likely no gap problem. But sometimes what there is there's a knowledge problem. How do we engage volunteers? How do we communicate to those volunteers? How do we use the volunteer infrastructure? Okay, those 45 different ways that I was talking about, some of them have to do with that, right? How do we make sure that the person who's responsible for member experience or member relations or whatever it is in the same mindset and the same knowledge space with the person responsible for advocacy and external communications, right? And if you're big enough organizations, internal communications. By the way, that's kind of where retreats and getting people aligned actually kind of helps, right? But it's easier said than done. Okay, let's meet for lunch. We'll make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, and then everyone goes back to the desk and they do what they did before, right? And it's not as simple as let's meet for lunch and we'll figure it out, because this is a continuing issue with respect to external marketing communications driving internal. Okay, internal driving external, and if you're a membership-based organization, there's that entire dimension with the volunteers and with your membership. So it's a fascinating one. It really is. Okay, but the question is it a multiplicative kind of synergistic kind of thing that's possible, or is it one that is just frankly, frustrating and misaligned? And I think that's where the challenge is. Yeah.
Communicating, as you said, top of the hour, is a skill. Everyone can speak, everyone can write. Communicating through the written word is a skill. Communicating through spoken word is a skill. And you, as a professional speaker, you're always investing in yourself, how to do it better, how to be more impactful, how to motivate more. But how would you help your clients develop that skill? Where would you tell them to start, and what investment should they make, and for their leadership team or for their frontline workers to develop that skill?
So let me answer that in a couple parts too. There's a lot going on in that question. Number one is fine. I'm in the Speaking Hall of Fame. There's very few of us in it. I wish it was called the Professional Listening Hall of Fame, because I think that the biggest driver of my success is my honest desire to listen very carefully to what other people are saying. And sometimes it's one-on-one if I'm coaching a leader, for example. Sometimes it's a small group. Okay. Sometimes it's internally at the Brain Trust. Okay. With the team. Sometimes it's on a big stage, right? But I think it's the question of how do you teach people to listen is half the battle. By the way, I'm still learning. Okay. I got a quite a way to go. I'm certainly not perfect, but I try, right? And I think that there's things that you can actually teach people. And we can do we've got an MBA in the day, and we've got a management essentials course, and we could sort of put everybody through that. And that's one way of doing it. Another way is to say, let's drip knowledge to people on a monthly basis. Let's have a 45 minutes sort of presentation, and then let's have the next week an office hours where people can ask Rania or me anything about the topic that was trained on. Another way is to do retreats, a team retreat or a leadership retreat where it brings everyone together, and that becomes the way of building these particular skills. And sometimes, whether it's for a high potential individual or somebody in the leadership team, it's one-on-one coaching. I'm not talking about coaching to help you be more empathetic, or let's do Myers-Briggs and numbers and colors and disc and everything like that. But it's really more about saying, okay, performance coaching. Let's see about getting you at that next level, because if you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So there's that mechanism for the most senior people or the people who are high potentials, right? So the investment. Oh my God, this is really hard because we've worked with some very, very, very small organizations, and the pricing is sort of set to match, and we've worked with some global financial institutions, and where the complexity and sort of what the solution is matches their size. And I think the question that most organizations are asking these days is, where do we spend our money if we want to retain people, if we want them engaged? Okay, we're going to send them off somewhere else, and they'll get some message that's not aligned with what we're doing, or do we find a way to sort of bring that together? And let me give you an example of this. So fine, I'm coaching a C-level client, right? But if we're doing a retreat, guess what? We learn a lot from what that C-level client's thinking, and that infuses what might go in the retreat. But during the retreat, guess what? We have all kinds of interesting one-on-one conversations, like at the breaks in the morning and the evening, all that kind of stuff, which, by the way, get fed back into the coaching conversation, right? Or for that matter, if we do monthly CPD, CE, the webinar and office hours thing, all the questions and everything, where do you think that flows back to? That flows back into the coaching, it flows back into retreat, it flows back into any of the training we do. And so that way things become a little bit more. So we've got some clients that say, well, we need everything. Okay. Most of the time we have clients where they're doing some things actually really well. And but there's a couple of things that are missing. So kind of we fit into those missing bits, right? And you know, I wish I could answer your question, how big is the investment, Rania? Let me just answer. We're ridiculously expensive. Ridiculous. Okay, now that I've said that, okay, no, we're reasonable. We want to work with interesting people and we find a way to make it work. But we haven't seen two clients that are the same because everyone's different. So, by the way, I have to tell everyone who's listening, I have no idea what questions you're going to ask, and I have no idea what questions Rania is going to ask. So this is all kind of, I feel like I'm on the hot seat, which is fun for me, but honestly, I have no idea what questions are coming up. So
Fun for me too to try to surprise Randall. You mentioned earlier about town halls. I'm happy to hear you talk a little more about that, especially on the heels of this talking as a skill. Of course, there's the in-person town hall, and there's, of course, so much power to that, the formality of it, the excitement around the announcements, the shared experiences, the post-presentation chatter, and that creates a shared corporate memory, right? But what's probably more relevant to talk about is the prevalence of virtual town halls. So I think we should talk about maybe like how to make those at all more compelling or more effective, more constructive. Or is it that the in-person town hall should be more valued for all hands and maybe all hands should get together even on a multi-year cycle just to create that corporate, like that shared experience? What do you think?
so I think that there's incredible merit in having, especially, with COVID, like way back now. We recognize some merit in actually coming together in one place to strongly build the relationships and build the bonds, if you will, that can then lubricate the virtual conversations that actually take place. Right. I think that there's something to be said about that. I also recognize that not all organizations can afford to bring everybody in all the time. Sometimes you could do that at the end of a conference, right? Or sometimes there's a sales kickoff of some sort, and you could say, well, let's bring in a few other people and we'll do something there too. So let me just talk about it. I don't want to use the word generically, but generically, whether it's live in person or live via Zoom or Teams or some such. Um, I've always thought it was a wasted opportunity for town halls where all of a sudden everyone is told at 2 p.m. Eastern, um, please log into this and we're going to hear from the leader. And you'll have a chance to ask your questions as well. I've always thought that was just a totally wasted opportunity. What would happen instead if you did a town hall like this? um, a week before or 2 weeks before, you did a survey saying, hey, we want to make sure that anything's answered. Any questions that you like or any ideas that you have, fill out this 3-question survey. We'd love to look at it. What if, okay, based on that, you're able to provide some information beforehand? Maybe it's a FAQ. Okay, maybe it's a short video from one or two other leaders, etc. Maybe it's I don't know what it is, a handbook, part of an intranet, okay, a roadmap for what you're going to do to sort of address some of the questions that people might have done beforehand. Maybe you can give them some work beforehand. Okay. So, for example, let's just say you're going to do a rebrand of the organization, or you're doing a merger, or there's big legislative change, or some big thing that you want to use the town hall to address that. Okay, maybe you can get people to brainstorm some ideas on how to resolve the big thing. Maybe you can get them engaged in how might we do something or other. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's to identify challenges or things that might need to. But if you get people sort of engaged before they show up, they're primed, they're ready to hear the message, whatever that message happens to be. It could be an update. And I think, by the way, having a bit of a structure to the town hall, I mean, that's kind of, standard fare now. But why not let people know what that structure is beforehand? Okay, remarks from so and so, remarks from so and so, open Q&A. Maybe it's a fireside chat interviewed by somebody from outside, to rather than just the talking head kind of thing. Okay, open for questions. Okay, and maybe there's something that happens afterwards. We're very sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. We've taken some time just to note down some of them. Or, I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. Thank you for putting them in the chat. So I took a few minutes to do a bit of a video just to quickly try and address as many as I could. The rest, we'll bring back the senior team or the board, and we'll put that into the mix. I just think, and then afterwards, for example, after that, um, there's that information collection mechanism. At the largest organizations, you go to the middle managers and say, any questions, any feedback, anything that you hear about what people said, about what happened at that big town hall meeting. In smaller and medium-sized organizations, you can do there's an expression, management by wandering around. You can sort of do a bit of a wander around and say, hey, listen, any questions that you had about that maybe weren't brought up at the town hall, or any questions or anything that you want to talk about, right? And that way, that sort of closes the loop. That closes the loop. Um, I love town halls. Oh, one other thing I would say is this: not every leader is fluent in terms of communication skills. Sometimes, they may be brilliant, but this isn't something that they're really good at. Or they may be very great communicators, but they're really not great at answering questions in a way that seems authentic, right? And being on the hot seat is scary, and it shows. And normally they're confident, and it doesn't look as good as it could. In both cases, some training and some coaching can actually make a difference, a big difference, right? And that would include, frankly, some mock-up trial runs, etc., so that they can develop the confidence and the skill as well. So all of those kinds of things can make a town hall far more successful than some of them that I've seen. I'm just glad that this thing, which wasn't a thing X years ago, is something that people recognize is important.
My next question.
Sure.
How can an organization create a stronger sense of accountability around their own communications and their commitments to communications? It's not like a financial audit where there are real world deadlines and consequences. It's not like client work where there are real world deadlines and consequences. Communications are largely discretionary. Yet, as we said at the top of the hour, so important to client engagement and managing, employee engagement and managing the culture of the organization. So how do we create more sense of import to the communications?
I think it's different for the larger organizations versus the smaller ones. But number one, I'd say, is some expectation setting. Um, so for example, if the if one of the mechanisms of communication are informal lunch and learns, you can't have lunch and learns on a sporadic kind of basis. You have to say, well, every second Tuesday we're going to do lunch and learn, and whatever it happens. So now there's a mechanism that ensures that actually happens, or at least sets it up. If it's one-on-ones, we know one client, for example, who did training to the entire organization on what a one-on-one was and how often it's supposed to take place, and what type of questions the manager or the staff member might consider asking in that one-on-one. And it should, we've got a performance appraisal, for example, that happens once a year. We have, for example, you know, informal conversations whenever they happen, but maybe there's a place for that monthly one-on-one, or bi-monthly, or twice a month, if whatever the standard is. But I think if you set some standards, you do a little bit of training, right? And the way that's done in a large organization is different than a smaller one.
Randall, I'm going to push on what you said. You talked about our client And no, nothing is in a vacuum. Okay. If it's happening here, it's happening everywhere else. Okay. You mentioned the client that did
I know what you're gonna say. Oh my God.
that
Okay.
they did a training on have to have a one-on-one, important of one-on-one, it's expected. And when we circled back to the team, people were not consistently getting their one-on-ones. And it's not just this, if someone has expected to meet a certain sales quota, if you're expected to do anything that's not really tied to real world deadlines, and it doesn't happen, then what? Right? And the problem is the only way to really signal that you're not getting those one-on-ones, as an example, or other expectations, is to blow the whistle on the people around you. And that also impacts culture, right? So I do think it's hard to enforce unless you're really, really on top of people, which not everybody wants to do.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel it personally. It's a challenge. I feel it personally. So let's just take a look at a mid-sized organization, right? The CEO, like there's a management team, there might be an HR, there's a communications person, it's got some functional leadership, not just the founder and a small number of people around them. Um, so the CEO says we're going to do one-on-ones. And then the CEO does not do one-on-ones to his or her direct reports. Okay, but says you should do one-on-ones. And then the one-on-ones for those direct reports, these VPs, they do not do direct reports to all the directors that report to them, who, by the way, despite being told, um, are not doing one-on-ones with the people, the managers, who are not doing one-on-ones with the people who are on the front line, right? And of course, some will do it and others won't. But the question is, on one, how do we make sure as leaders that we're actually modeling what we need? For me, I wish I could be a better model at sometimes, but I'm not perfect. Okay, but I'd like to think that I try. I think most leaders kind of feel that as well. Um, um, how do you make sure, for example, that if there's performance objectives, and typically medium large organizations have got that for all their people, that this is one of the things, if it's truly important, for example, that there's a weekly production meeting, that this is one of the objectives that they're measured on. Is there a weekly production meeting every single week, right? Um, Sometimes there's surveys, right? And the survey results with respect to employee engagement, member engagement, if those results are not to the particular level, that has a dramatic impact on people's performance appraisal as well, which impacts, everything bonus and promotion and pay raise and all that kind of thing. So I think that's the way to tag it back. In the smallest organizations, it's a lot harder to do, an awful lot harder to do.
Thank you, Randall, for this conversation. Thank you to everyone who joined us live and everyone listening in. If any of the issues you've talked about resonate with you, if you're considering a change and want our perspective, if you're thinking of offering some upskilling and professional development to your team, if you're planning a retreat, interested in coaching, do reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation and share resources. If you'd like the invites to these live monthly Q&As, do email us at info@randallcraig.com, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next one. And do find us on LinkedIn.